Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowry.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. Go to strengthguild.com, strengthguild.com. Scroll down to the Iron Radio collections, and we've got new shirts and new banners for you to support the show. Everything from just a regular banner or regular shirt to ones with sayings on them, like Lonnie's Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree shirt. And some news for you, we're going to have some contests for people who own these shirts and things. So if you support the show, we'll let you more on that later. So if you get in on these early, you can be one of the first people to win some prizes. So thank you very much. Go check out the site, strengthguild.com. Scroll down to Iron Radio Collections and support the show.
Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry. I'm an exercise physiology and nutrition professor of about 20 years, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
This is Phil Stevens, strength coach, powerlifter, Helling Games athlete. I run Strength Guild and a bunch of other stuff.
It's Dr. Mike T. Nelson. I do the Flux Diet Cert, and faculty member at the Carrick Institute, and my very last day in Hood River, Oregon.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Dean Guedo. I'm meathead / fit bro / online nutrition coach from Canada.
Canada, eh?
Canada, eh?
Sorry.
Exactly.
Sorry.
you might get that today.
All right. Let's get to one little tidbit of news. It'd be fun to get Dean's input on this too. This is from late spring of this year, so it's new.
Strength and muscle sport news.
The power of protein. This is from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. This is just sort of, this isn't the actual article. This is sort of their opening editorial that sets it up. But I like it because it kind of cuts to the chase. By Simpson and Robbenheimer. So it says, there's a growing consilience, there's a word, of evidence suggesting a central role for protein in the control of food and energy intake in humans. So they looked at data from 13 countries with a certain amount of gross, domestic product and that sort of thing. In the U.S., we eat 16% protein, 48% carbs, and 33% fat. And that's been pretty consistent over the years. My old textbooks say basically the same thing. Here's where it gets interesting. Patterns across the 13 countries were concordant with findings from the United States, with a mean percent protein intake also being 16% of total calories. The proportion of protein in the diets of 14 countries was highly consistent, whereas calories from fat and carbs were more variable within and between populations, suggesting that humans regulate their intake of dietary protein more strongly than they do of other macronutrients. It says this amount of protein every day is within the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, so the AMDR, which is about 10 to 35% of your calories. For those of you who aren't familiar, the feds would just say, if you're excited about protein, you like the satiety or the metabolic boost or protein synthetic effects, whatever you're after, they suggest don't go much above 35% of calories, not because there's something toxic, but you might not get enough variety in your diet, that sort of thing. 80 to 85 grams, if you just look at gross intake, okay? So highly consistent across countries, about 80 to 85 grams a day. I know a lot of our listeners would be like, I eat that in a meal, bro. Well, you may, but you're probably doing that intentionally in some way or just because you're eating heroic amounts of food. It says at a relative intake of 1 gram per kg body weight, this is somewhat higher. Again, this is the Gen Pop. Somewhat higher than the RDA, which we know is 0.8 grams per kg. So this article in this journal that they're editorializing about, Lieberman, conclude that their results lend credence to something called the protein leverage hypothesis. And I think this is curious because this is actually something over the years Mike and I have independently come to sort of teach clients, or I even mention it in the classroom. But this idea that if you count grams of protein from lean sources of food, that's a pretty effective first step at dieting, right? Because it's satiating and that kind of thing. But here they're going a step further, and they're saying people are remarkably sort of homeostatically, seeking a certain amount of protein, and everything else is up for debate. Anyway, it says these data lend credence to the protein leverage hypothesis, which proposes that because of a strong propensity to regulate the amount of protein eaten, humans are at risk of obesity when the proportion of protein in the diet falls as a result of diluting the food supply with calories from non-protein sources, that is, fats and carbs. The original insight for the protein leverage hypothesis came from the observation that whereas energy intake had risen during the emergence of the global obesity epidemic, absolute protein consumption remained remarkably stable. So in other words, we're still looking for that number of grams of protein. If it's in low proportion foods, like if you're trying to do it, let's say with bread products, it's got 3 grams in a serving, kind of thing, you're going to have to eat an awful lot of bread, or Mike's talked about this with, Mike, you mentioned like plant proteins before. If you want to get an effective dose, like gross dose, then you got to eat more, sometimes twice as much. So anyway, it says, why is this such a big deal? Why do people seek this standard daily dose of protein? It says the answer likely lies in the need to balance the cost of eating too little protein, which would result in poorer growth and reproduction, against the cost of consuming too much protein. And then they say, for example, accelerated rates of aging and late life health impacts. Now, again, I don't think they're saying the protein is necessarily causing the health impacts, because it says nutrition is about mixtures, the next sentence, in fact. And if you're going to try to get your amount of protein from dilute sources, you're just eating more calories, and that's going to lead to, speedier aging and that kind of thing potentially. So anyway, protein leverage hypothesis. Your body's going to seek a certain amount of protein. And again, I think one of the practical applications of this might just be, hey, bro, get your protein, count grams of fairly lean protein food. So like chicken breasts, things like that. I don't mean like a triple cheeseburger, from the fast food joint. That's not just protein. And it's, satisfy that homeostatic kind of thing that human beings, almost regardless of where they live, seem to want to get that level. So
would that play into, like, if you needed to lose weight, you would upregulate?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, all they're saying, the protein leverage hypothesis just says, listen, regardless of where you are, you want that dose, and then how you get it is really the thing. So I guess that's a good question. And I mean, I don't know. Like I said, the only practical application I've ever drawn from something like this, and I know Mike has too, is try to eat, fill up on protein, seek this amount, more or less pure protein foods. Again, something like a chicken breast or a whey protein drink or something like that. And satisfy your body's desire for that, I suppose. So, and Phil, this is not unlike what you do too, where you talk about, listen, protein is constant. What goes up and down over the course of the year when you gain and loss is mostly carbs.
Yep.
So protein leverage hypothesis. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I like that. I think that's pretty cool, especially to have that much data across different populations. And I'm always fascinated, and it's very hard to do this research now, but if you think that we're survival based, right? We made it this long, that having some internal cues to get a minimum amount, right? Like several 100,000 years ago, we're not walking around with scales trying to measure everything out. You just went by appetite and what you could get, which was variable. But having that sort of internal drive to seek particular foods, I'm always fascinated by. And we've kind of moderately, corrupted all that, so it's hard to do research now on it per se. But yeah, even similar to like fats and carbohydrates, I've wondered if your body is kind of more tuned to burning carbohydrates, it appears your appetite then wants to kind of replenish those more, maybe not in the best light either, especially as you're borderline on pathology. But it's interesting with protein that we have data showing that it's pretty consistent across the board. And like you've talked about, Lonnie, and written books on, even having more protein generally tends to help other things. But I think we also forget as a sort of lifting community that's based on, protein seekers. When you have a new client, that a lot of times it's hard for them to get that much protein in. I always tell coaches, think back to the first time, you went from, 80 to 100 grams of protein a day to say 200 or something like that. That takes time and effort and work and planning. And, after a while it does become more habit, but I think it's easy for us to forget that if that's something new, that takes work to do it.
Yeah, I think that's why shakes are, of course, so popular. Fortress used to complain all the time about, God, I have to eat so many cans of tuna and broccoli, and it's like, well, drink it, bro. So that's all I've got, though. So
cool, awesome. And we have our guest today, Dean Guedo, and he wants to. Do you want to introduce what the topic of the day is, and then we're going to ask about kind of your background there?
Yeah, like a simple version of high flux would just mean, and I guess if we're talking bro and lifters, it would essentially be, can we get to a point where instead of eating less calories and doing less work, we can kind of burn the same amount of energy by having more energy in the system, so eating more and moving more, and then you would kind of tailor that based on this conversation even about gaining weight or losing weight, just at a higher energy intake. So essentially solving the problem of, can I eat more food and lose or gain weight? And so for bros, it's, can I eat more food? You just have to walk more.
Got it.
Or lift more.
So you're basically still looking at the calories in, calories out equation, but we're now looking at it, say, between 1,600 calories in and out, which is, let's say, calorically even. Compare that to maybe 3,500 calories in and out, even though it's still calorically even. Is there a difference between, Bob and, the second person, Bob later in life, Bob 2 or something?
Yeah, it's just like comparing it, from my perspective anyways, and where I was coming from was in terms of weight loss clients, like, do I want Bob? We'll use Bob. Do I want to have Bob who's eating 1,500 calories and white knuckling a weight loss diet, or do I want a Bob where I can have him eating 3,000 calories and still having those same goals? Considering where Bob lives, which is for us North America and Western society, which it likes its food. And you mentioned hamburgers, but there's hamburgers everywhere. And so it's just like, which Bob do you want?
Got it. Awesome. And how did you initially get into weightlifting, and now you work as a nutrition coach? What got you interested in this whole field?
Yeah, to kind of keep it short, I think we all have our own story, but I have the cliche one, which I'm sure you've heard before, but it's basically ex-athlete. So I played college football, and then I actually became a teacher because I had a few injury years, so I needed to stay in school just a little bit longer to play football. And it was just, what can I get into that I like? And it was essentially teaching. And then that ended up being the plan because I didn't make pro. So like any athlete, my number 1 and 2 goals was to be a pro athlete, and that never worked out. So then I became a teacher, and I kind of found myself needing something to do after football was done, right? So like I left with tons of injuries. So I had a hip surgery and a knee surgery, and naturally I decided to be a powerlifter. So
that makes sense.
I did power. Yeah, I was totally messed up, and my knee and hip hurt. But I actually I was also a bouncer, so typical athlete football bouncer. All my bouncing friends or doorman friends were all powerlifters, and they were multiply powerlifters. So naturally, I went straight to West Side, bands, boxes, full multiply gear, and I basically did that for about 3 years, and I did well. But I found myself as a teacher thinking about lifting pretty much 24/7, and so somewhere around, I want to say like 28, I switched to essentially personal training, and then kind of through all that learned all the stuff I learned, and I met people like you and kind of the PRI, DNS, kind of hooked up with Ben and Pat Davidson, and just kind of created a network through that. And then I opened my own training studio, and somewhere along there, I closed the training studio and became an online coach. And now I currently work for Stronger You doing online nutrition.
Awesome.
So yeah, like basically ex athlete, always a meathead, and kind of went through that whole progression career wise and kind of online, which works right now where the world's at. So yeah.
If you were to go back and do the progression again, which I think is probably typical for a lot of lifters, are there things in there you would change?
Yeah, I wouldn't have done multiply lifting, but you know what? It just messed me up because it was one of those things where the gear masked my inevitable knee injury, but my hip injury, just because it made me. I was able to lift a lot really fast, but being a meathead, like I was at 1 month post like hip surgery, so I was just young and dumb, and I wanted to lift weights with my friends, and but I think at the same time you kind of got to go through that. Like I went through the whole like lifting and bench press only as in high school and do an arm pump, and then you kind of go to naturally just lifting as much as you can. And I think without those experiences I wouldn't have liked lifting, and grew up in a generation where it was you still lifted a lot and you lifted hard and you kind of went to the gym because you liked the gym. And so I got that experience, and so I'm grateful for it because I still feel like that's the right way, obviously. Yeah.
I've thought a lot about this and had conversations with other people too of, I don't know if there's anything you can do anymore if someone is hell-bent on just going through that phase of trying to figure out where the borders are, and they just inevitably put the car in the ditch a few times. Like, I don't know if you can really talk them out of it per se. Maybe a few people you can, but I'm at the point now where I'm like, maybe we should just put little bumpers on the side, so you're gonna just let you screw up, but just don't total the car in the process. Like I
don't know though. Like, like one weird thing is like everything I've learned lifting wise or been pushed towards has literally been from every injury I've experienced. I mean, and that's where it's kind of right now. Like my biggest gripe on my podcast we kind of talked about is we kind of lost that ability to like be stupid. Because I think that, and I don't know how any of you guys are, but like a lot of the good stuff came out of the stupidity, and you can kind of, once you get smarter, you can kind of carry that that go hard attitude into smarter stuff. But you kind of gotta hit the ditch, I think, maybe at least once.
Yeah, I think you. Now I'm at the point of, I think you do just, can we do whatever it is to give you the minimal amount of damage, but still have you learn the lesson? It's like, just don't entirely total the car and mess yourself up for 5 years, but maybe blow a few tires and, dent the bumper, and that's enough for you to figure out what you need to do. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Phil, with new lifters you work with?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing you could do is hopefully share your past and try. Yeah. But like we've talked about it before, I'm not sure there's just certain stuff you have to go through yourself.
Yeah.
Before you come not stupid. I mean, I can tell them over and over again, and then they do it what I don't want them to do, and they're like, "Oh, you were right." Yeah, I was. So now we actually do it. So I don't know. I think there's inevitable growth that you just have to go through, but.
Yeah, I had like that typical experience where like you're bench pressing and you put on too much weight in the gym, and I think it was like 225, and I was like 17, and I dropped it on myself, and you had to roll it off in the middle of the gym, and like I never did that again, and I used the spot because it was very embarrassing. You had to like get it up to your hips and then roll it off your knees and then act like nothing happened. You're deadlifting in front of the bench. But if you don't have that experience, like you kind of, I don't know, it hardens you. So.
Yeah, I do kind of agree that the end goal is to, I wouldn't say maybe lift stupid, but just be able to put a lot of effort cleanly and safely into something. Or I don't even know, like when you first start out, if anyone's really trained to do that. And if you had a couple old injuries on top of it, that always just seems like it's a recipe for you to just blow yourself up.
That was the one benefit, and we're both mutual friends with like Ryan LeCure and Pat Davidson, but like a lot of that metabolic stress stuff and even those strength circuits, when I was having my own facility, it was one of those things where that was the teacher, because it was light enough where it didn't mess them up, but it also like there was a goal, and they couldn't be worse every workout, but they actually like learned how to lift. And I use stupid, but they actually learned how to lift hard, because at that age, especially with newer people, like 1 RMs don't mean anything, because it's going up by 300% in 6 months. It's nothing to do with you. So that's what that kind of stuff tends to, you can kind of burn working hard into them, and then you can figure out the rest later.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I use a lot of rower for stuff. You know, if it's a meathead, it's like, just get on the rower and do a 500 meter, like do an actual all-out RPR, or I'm sorry, rating and perceived effort, RPE, 9.5, an actual 10, and then, then tell me how that went. If you're walking around fine in 30 seconds, no, it wasn't hard enough. But I'm not super worried that, you can injure yourself, but the odds of injury are much lower. Or put them on an Airdyne or something like that, or push a car, or drag a sled, or there's some things I think just mechanically, when you get so fatigued, your risk of injury is just substantially less. And I would not put high rep Olympic lifts as one of those unless you're an extremely advanced athlete. But and you work for a nutrition training company now, Stronger You?
Yeah, so like that kind of, actually the seminar, but the Kansas City Summit, is that how you say it?
Fitness Summit.
Fitness Summit, yeah. The big one. That same weekend I met you, I actually kind of met all the Stronger You people, and I had a few of them on my podcast, The Fitness Devil, but it was kind of just through that conversation, we essentially started a fitness company on the Stronger You side. So I'm one of the owners of Stronger You Fitness, which services the nutrition clients. And then I now also work at Stronger You Nutrition as a one-on-one nutrition coach. So it was kind of a networking thing, but like, the same weekend I met you, I met essentially my employers / partners. and it allowed me to close my gym. Like, it was one of those things where I didn't really want to close my gym, but just kind of that work-life balance thing, and I was making more money in less time. And the coaching online, especially one-on-one nutrition, you get a lot of reps, and it was just really interesting to me. So it was just a natural progression once all that was gone. Because I don't know, you guys can probably all relate to being a trainer. It's just it's tough, long hours, weird hours, and it depends. Like right now, like in this economy, like I would have had to close my gym anyways. So
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to that, because people always ask for, what's your advice for being in the fitness industry? I'm like, part of it is just go to events, like meet people, like whether, Lonnie and I have been to a whole bunch of academic events. We've been down to Phil's place, all of us have been to events in Tahoe together. And especially early on, it's like, you probably are not presenting, you're going to pay money, and nothing may happen. I mean, I've gone to events where, and looking back, nothing really ever happened to it, but I'm glad I went to it. And I've gone to other events, and like ISSN in 2011, and ran into Lou Schuler and got an article about metabolic flexibility in men's health, so it's just show up and meet people, have fun, try not to be incredibly annoying, and just see what happens.
I think that's the incredibly annoying is a good one, because I think, and we've kind of talked about this in private before, but a lot of people go to events wanting something from people, or they're going to meet Lou Schuler and give him an article, when you could just like be yourself and kind of meet people organically, and that tends to lend well to all the things that people want anyways. Like, so. Yeah,
I kind of hate the term networking. It's like, I get it. I know what it means, but
sounds greasy.
One of the biggest things I realized is that if you're let's say someone who's popular in the fitness world, whatever the hell that means, you probably have a lot of people that are just wanting free stuff from you all the time, and like highly specific stuff. Like Lonnie's had this, I know Phil's had this, you've had this. Like just random people are like, hey bro, I need a program to deadlift 600 pounds. Just send it to me. Really? Like that one? Where if you just talk to the person like another normal human being, like I always think of like, what's something I have in common with this person? And then it's just more like a real, actual, organic conversation, because you're both actually interested in it. And odds are that it's going to make you completely different than everybody else that they met too, who's just feels like they're not intentionally, but the perception is they're trying to just get something for free, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's how I think we met. We met with a 3-hour conversation that ended in an RPR session.
Yeah.
But it was like, I didn't want that. No one should want that once they have it. But that's how we met.
Yeah.
Talking about survival, I think you did your survival spiel, like the, you know, you have your like intro survival, like do you breathe, and that's how we met.
Yeah, but what's cool, even meeting you and Anthony at the same time, is that I could tell by talking to you guys, you had put a lot of effort into the things that you were studying, and you actually did stuff about it. So you weren't just asking random weirdo questions, hey bro, give me a custom program. Like, you had already done a lot of the reps and put time and effort into particular things. And to me, that's like super cool, because that tells me that person's, you know, invested in what they're doing already. And for me, that's like, oh, okay, well, if I help this person, then they're probably going to follow through and do those particular things, right? Because no one really wants to feel like their time is, you know, quote unquote, kind of wasted per se. So. Awesome. And cool. Anything else you want to add? And we'll transition into the topic of the day here.
I don't think so. I think I kind of undersold I'm just a stupid meathead who lifts hard. But like like you said, I learned stuff. I feel like I know a few things.
I know stuff.
Maybe that's more of an applied knowledge. That's why I should have used that word instead of stupidity, like applied knowledge.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
It's what is like the old, I don't know, I probably slaughtered it as a Zen saying or something. Like, if you try to measure how intelligent a fish is by asking him to climb a tree, you think he's kind of stupid. But then you watch him swim around in water, you're like, oh wow, maybe not. So it's always context specific. Like, if anybody asks me anything about history or anything that's just not even in basically physiology, kiteboarding, or death metal, I don't really know much of anything at all. I really don't.
You know a lot of studies though.
Yeah,
I don't know how you guys are, but Mike's like my go-to.
They're not. Good luck. Awesome. Well, we'll do a short break here, and then we'll get into the topic of the day.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, you know who this is. So I'm here to tell you about Dr. Mike T. Nelson's new book, Why You Should Eat Keto. I don't do it because, I mean, look at me. Come on, I'm fabulous and I'm fantastic. Anyway, you should text the Keto ebook, all in one word, to 44222 to receive your free copy. Do it now!
Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that, and I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book, but that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast, but over the years there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, But if you like to listen through YouTube, on a Roku, or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
And we're back. It's Dr. Lonnie Lowry, Coach Phil Stevens, myself, and we're on with Dean about the difference in nutrition and training, comparing a state of high flux versus a state of low flux. And early part of the show, we kind of teased you with, we've got Bob, who's kind of at a low flux versus Bob at a high flux, and what may be some differences there, and how this can be applied to your lifting and body comp. So how did you get into looking at this concept of flux?
Yeah, I want to say it was one of your podcasts, but I don't really know. It was, I kind of had to, we kind of met up at Ben's place in Costa Rica, and we had to come up with
Dr. Ben House.
Yeah, Dr. Ben House, King Meathead, bro researcher. But
Right.
we had to come up with a topic to present in front of everyone. But like, essentially, we need a topic, and he's like, "You're gonna present in front of Eric Helms and Mike T. Nelson." I was like, "Oh, that sucks. Like, that's the last thing. This is the last thing I want to do." But it was like I needed something that was personal to me and kind of what I did, because I didn't want to just do, and like the whole thing was about pushing growth and all this stuff, but I really wanted to do something that was going to push my career wise. And essentially I was doing it with my clients anyways, because from my perspective, I deal with a lot of Gen Pop clients, and generally like 25 to 40-year-old, and a lot of them females, but we have Bobs. And the big thing that I always found was after a period of weight loss, there was two options. You could keep white knuckling it, and by that I mean like keep lowering calories, and like basically they did less energy, and that was kind of the common norm, is like, well, you just eat less, right, and you kind of work out more. And I found that like that didn't work as well, and what tended to work better was if I could slowly creep the calories up, and what we termed as maintenance. People kept losing weight, and they thought I was a magician, like, oh, I can eat food and I'm losing weight. And then I found like the more I added in the steps and the activity, and then just kept rising calories, it was just a better option for long-term weight loss. Because essentially what I found was if they can eat more food, they can have more, I don't want to call them mess ups, but they have more opportunities to not mess up. Because when you're eating 1,200 calories or 1,100 calories as a 120-pound female, there's no room for error. Like that's like we talked about 80 grams in a shake. Well, I could eat that for breakfast. And so, and you could eat that at a fast food joint. So I found that people that were kind of above 2,000 calories for females and males, in and around that high 2,000s, low 3,000s, they just had it better long term. I just wanted to find out what that was, and I don't know if I found it or Ben basically said, "Oh, that's high flux." I didn't know what that was. It was and so I started researching that, and then like you find out with research is like no one really has any terms nailed down, and high flux wasn't even really a thing until I think recently. So it was just really hard. And so that's how I got started into it anyways, was a story of like, what is this thing and why is it working so well? And kind of that conundrum of, can I find a better long-term weight loss solution? And not to think I'm going to change the world, but like I felt like that was a better way of going about things, especially in our current environment.
Got it.
So, yeah.
And what did you find based on the research when you looked into it?
Well, the one thing I found is like there's everyone doesn't call high flux.
So I can't go to
but the one
PubMed and type in high flux, have 1,000 studies show up.
Yeah, I realized that if you're gonna like research a topic, PubMed's great, but especially with something newer, like they might not call it that thing. So I had to kind of figure out. But they did have a few new studies. But the one thing I found that was kind of the most intriguing was people who were in high flux ended up having lower hunger ratings, which would seem logical, but that was a huge piece, because it's like, if you think about people and I'm using weight loss clients, but people who are like losing weight or cutting, one of the biggest triggers is that hunger. And if they're hungry all the time, there's going to be more opportunity to kind of, I guess, screw up, so to speak. So that was a huge thing. It's like, oh, they could eat more food, but their hunger ratings dropped subjectively. And the other one was, I think, you probably remember the name of the study, but they essentially compared eating more and moving more to eating less and kind of, not necessarily moving less, but they were basically in a high flux and low flux. And again, the common knowledge, especially for a lot of my clients, was, well, you just eat less. And that was kind of the common message. You go on Instagram, we talked about YouTube stars and all this stuff. It's like, well, just eat less, bro. And or Karen or Bob or whoever. And it actually didn't perform as well. The people who actually predicted long-term sustainable weight loss were the high flux people. And that kind of got me thinking, like, oh, okay, maybe the story isn't that simple. And so, yeah, like there was only like really 3 studies that were really checking out. I don't know if you saw any more new ones, but those were the 2 big ones. Is like they're not as hungry, and it predicts long-term weight loss way better than low energy flux. And that was a huge thing for me. And then I kind of got into the Amish stuff, which we can talk about too.
Yeah, and I think that's the part people forget, right? Because you have all these people running around on the internet saying, oh, there's just compliance and it's just calories. Yeah. It's not hard. I'm like, yeah, that. I always think of the Dr. Stu Phillips quote. He's like, if we took the average person off the street and asked them, he said, do you know you should eat less and move more? I think they're probably going to say, yeah. He's like, he's like, telling the average person to eat less and move more, he said, is like telling a depressed person to just have a nice day. Is it correct? Yeah, it's correct. Is it useful advice? No, it's completely worthless advice at that point. And I think that's where it goes the rails.
Yeah, and that's where like the applied stuff is huge, because it's like we know things that work. Like, obviously I get people to eat less, like, right? Like when they're trying to cut or lose weight or have fat loss goals, like they're going to eat less for a period of time. I don't throw people in high flux because like they need to learn amounts and quality of food and movement and learn all those things that come with that. But it's like that when we talk about diets and people getting on diets, and even people coming to Strong View, again, if you come off the street and they think that they're coming into a diet, they're already expecting to just eat less. Like, this is not rocket science to them. It's like, yeah, we're going to eat less, and I'm going to figure it out, whether it's Atkins or Weight Watchers or whatever. They all consider, well, they all have that appeal because you're going to eat less and you're going to lose weight. But that's where it ends. And that's a huge problem to me anyways, because you can't do that forever. Like, because you did the starvation diets, but you can keep eating less, but like you'll be dreaming about food, and you'll be in a mental asylum with PTSD, and like that's not where we want people to be at the end of the day. And so it's kind of like I'm trying to figure out that part of it was the whole point of it.
Yeah, and that gets into the Minnesota starvation study too, which we won't spend forever on because it could be a whole episode. But in that study, it was conscientious objectors to the war, and they did put people on radically low caloric intakes. They did keep people moving all day, highly supervised. You probably could never even get this study approved now. And yeah, they definitely lost weight. They were not overweight really to start with. It worked, but I think if I remember right, they had 4 people check into a mental institution at the end. Then they have like 2 guys break out, and one guy was found in one of the stores trying to eat raw rutabaga, I think. I mean, just people were hoarding pictures of cookbooks like it was pornography. It just, I mean, crazy stuff. So even if you just nail the compliance and you just get radically low on your in and out, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have some side effects from what you're doing either.
Well, and that ends up being the benefit of high flux down the line, because we even talked about protein intake over populations in earlier in the show, and it's just like there's a difference between fat loss and weight loss. When you kind of push calories up, you end up getting higher. It's easier to get higher protein and get all that stuff, And so when we start pulling calories away, at some point muscle is going to have to give. And we know, like with long-term research and yo-yo diets, is like, again, if the common message is I just need to eat less, a lot of the times that doesn't include protein. And so they'll lose muscle, and then it'll be harder, and then they'll gain more back the next time, and then they'll go to the same way. And it's like, maybe this is a better solution for all the same reasons why we talked about higher protein's better, but they're not as hungry. High flux gets that. They're moving more, great metabolically. They're eating more. So in terms of environment, they're going to have more opportunities to eat more food without it affecting their fat loss phase. And so it was just like, it's a no-brainer to me. I don't know. I know you basically said that too. So after I kind of learned it, I'm like, I'm going to go. Mike's probably talked about this, obviously. And yeah, you basically learned everything about it you could. And yeah, it's kind of like if Mike co-signs on it, I think it's at least a good place to start. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'll ask Phil and Lonnie their opinion here. And the first time I heard of it was from John Brardy, who did a D-Flux seminar, a long time ago with Charles Poliquin. And he had written about it. And that's the first time I really kind of came across my radar. And at the time, I was like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. And looked at the research. I'm like, wow, this is pretty awesome. And then how, especially when you're early on, you think, oh, my God, this is going to revolutionize it. It just makes so much sense. And this matches with all the research. And then you don't really hear anything about it for a while.
We talked about it. Well, the thing is with that, so Lou messaged me. I wrote that article for Rebel. And Lou messaged me. He's like, great article. Loved it. I was actually writing about high flux back in the 80s. He didn't say 80s, but it was like, in early 2000s, he was writing about it. He learned about it from John, wrote about high flux and men's health. It was a big thing. He's like, yeah, it just never caught on, and it doesn't make any sense. Because it seems like everyone wants a simple answer, and it kind of is just as simple as the other stuff. It's like eat more, lift more, and move more. Like, that's pretty simple, and no one wants that quick fix. I don't know why. Like, it's not sexy, because I think it is. You can eat more food. Like, isn't that what we want? I don't get it.
Yeah. Do you do similar stuff with your clients, Phil? Obviously, you've got people competing in different weight classes, and you've got some more focused on body comp than others.
Well, yeah. I mean, and just on the topic he's talking about, I mean, it's always one of the first things people are like, how the hell you lose 30 pounds and eat as much as you do? Well, I fucking train hard, bro. It's just like the old adage when everybody talks about, hey, I want to look like, I don't know, name any professional athlete. Okay, well, have you tried training like them? If you do what they do, by default, most of them, especially in athletics, they're not looking to look a certain way. They're a byproduct of activity. You want to look like an NFL linebacker? Go train like one. Magic things happen when you have to train 5 hours a day.
Yeah. For weeks and that was years on end.
But that was the one when I pulled up that Amish study, so I kind of alluded to that before, and I found a study that Mike didn't find, which was like really fulfilling to me. And Eric Helms had no idea about the study, but they essentially talked about. Yeah, like I found this Amish study. Like they basically went to an Amish community and put pedometers on them and just saw how much they moved and how much they worked and how much they ate. Well, they didn't see how much they ate, but they have alluded to how much Amish people eat. But they're a byproduct of their environment, which is just they're farmers who don't use equipment. And they essentially solved obesity. There was like, I think it was like 5. I don't know what the actual numbers, but it was so low that they solved all the world's issues just by farming and walking. I think it was minimum of 20,000 to 30,000 steps a day. And essentially, Amish, anyone who knows Amish communities, like they don't eat well. Like it's like pre-World War II, so it's like pies and cakes and breads and all this stuff that's super high calorie dense foods. And they were basically shredded. It was like I think they were all like 6 and 7% body fat. And who knows, like if that's off a little bit, but they're not obese. And they don't think about it. Yeah,
and that's a problem here in the Midwest. You look at we're only. A lot of the people here are one generation removed from being on the farm.
Yeah.
And all those eating habits are still there. They eat like their grandpa did. But grandpa spent 14 hours in the field.
Yeah.
Every day. So it's no wonder the Midwest is pretty chunky. They haven't lost that eating habit that they had to have prior. But it's all mechanized now.
They need to sustain work.
Yeah, they need to work. If you worked like your grandpa, you could eat like your grandpa. You don't. You sit at a desk, so you don't get to wake up and have 6 biscuits and gravy and then, a second breakfast.
So,
well, that's where it's like really hard to, not hard to convince people. It's easy to convince people who lift, and that's what I've found. Like especially with my guy clients or my female clients that like lift hard, it's the easiest transition in the world because they just basically have to get their steps up. Because a lot of times with exercise, they'll downregulate NEAT. So if you get their NEAT up, you can just throw it's almost like magic. They think you're like some guru, and it's just more of like. Because if you put farming down, or even like a light farming to working out, we just think we're farmers, we lift lots of stuff, and then you add in the steps, like it's magic, and you're essentially just replicating being a farmer, kind of. But like if you have that mentality, like, and a lot of lifters do, like they just want to lift a lot of weights, like cool, like you're already in, like you have pretty much half the equation down.
What are your thoughts on this topic, Lonnie? Is this something that you teach students in regards to metabolism and regulation?
I think there's a lot to unpack with a lot of this stuff. I mean, the concept of flux means there has to be massive output. So essentially you're asking for double compliance with both diet and physical activity. And this was one of my – I was kind of – discussing and debating this with John back in the day is, well, it's not really we can't call this a diet. It's a two-pronged, sort of massive lifestyle intervention because a lot of people they can barely walk around the block. So I guess it's easy to answer with population specificity, right? If you are already a lifter, training like bodybuilder style to exhaustion 4 or 5 days a week, this is going to probably work great. Crank up the calorie input because the output side of flux is just there. And I mean in the literature, and you're right, Dean. You'll see lots of stuff like glycogen economy. You can call it lots of things. I know that's more carb specific, but getting stuff coming and going, it does require some definite barriers you have to overcome with people who aren't already sort of a gym bro. If their exercise capacity is very poor. This kind of does. I think that's why it fell out, and you didn't hear much of it beyond sort of the excited like lay magazines because, there's when you work with Gen Pop people a lot, you got to spend a period of time just getting them to train. I mean, the farmer thing is out. That Grandpa Farmer is his lifestyle is gonna destroy someone today. You're gonna have to go like 1/4 of the way to Grandpa. And get the flux moving at all. You know what I mean? So I guess my concern is just sort of the behavioral thing. Is it's not a dietary intervention. It's a lifestyle intervention, and it requires a lot. Again, on the output side of flux, I guess.
What was the negative part about it all was like if their lifestyle changes, like let's say Bob breaks his foot. Like we're out the window, and so if you didn't teach the skills of all that, it's not good, and that's why it's usually like. Is it a better solution? Maybe, right? Because you basically need to have those things in line. And like you said, when we talk about compliance, it's hard enough on a good day to get people to do those things. So you almost need the person to, and this is the same thing with exercise. It's like, can you use exercise to burn calories and all that stuff? Yeah, like the biggest thing was compliance and consistency, especially in the research. They couldn't come up with an answer because like a lot of people didn't do the fucking workouts. And so it's just about finding the thing that is their thing, whether it's Peloton or lifting weights or CrossFit or rowing. Get them in, find their thing, and then you just up the steps. And the steps you can't get around.
Yeah, that's astute. It's got to be like what Phil was saying, is physique is an outgrowth or a byproduct of doing something you like. Maybe it's even hiking to get them started, or you know what I mean. It saddens me to say it's not always the barbell work, but when you look at Google searches, and I do, and I've been looking at it recently, even with different podcasts, people they all literally they'll type in "get slim, no exercise," lose weight, no workout. Fast weight loss, no exercise. It's like the exercise part is almost the harder of the two.
Yep.
Although, again, in our population, though, we all know there are people who just get stuck, right? It's like, dude, your lifestyle is just plain abusive. You're training hard, and you're eating 1,700 calories a day. And there's definitely that population that would benefit from this flex concept in a big way because they just don't, like Mike with the Ansel Keys stuff. Like that stuff was just, is very informative. It's abusive, and you're not going to see it nowadays. These starvation studies and stuff, but it's fascinating concept.
Even walking though, like I think that's a big thing on powerlifters. I'm really deep in the powerlifting community. A lot of them are kind of understanding if they do a little bit of cardio or even like move more, they can kind of keep their lower body fat percentages so that they can have higher totals. But I was one of those people that thought 10,000 steps was stupid, and now I'm like preaching it to everyone. I feel almost like a crook, but it's like, especially I'm a powerlifter, I don't walk. It's like maybe you should. It'll get you stronger, but that's a hard thing to sell. But it's getting easier because people are understanding like movement's good, but they just don't want to exercise.
And for powerlifters and bodybuilder types, it's like it's not intense, so it's hard to make yourself do it because you don't get that sort of masochistic thrill, like beat me down, bro, but Phil and Rob, both you guys, when you're heavier, walking every day, it's even handy during weight gain because you kind of take off that little bit of fat in a very non-intense, fat-specific calorie drain kind of thing. Yeah, we've been huge components of walking, man, for years.
Well, I think it even helps digestion and everything else. I mean, you just feel better.
Yeah. It's sort of like the way a physical therapist does rehab. Like what you're actually doing in rehab is not intense. It's just sort of going through a full range of motion and doing what they tell you while the body heals. And it doesn't feel like a lot of effort investment, except the discipline to get out there and put one foot in front of the other at 6 o'clock in the morning.
One usually the sexy sell for that is body recomp, and I'm using quotations, but because it's hard to sell anything else, and you could be in better shape and still kill yourself in the gym, and it's one of those things where it's just a hard sell, but it's actually really effective. Even I think you were talking about using carbs. If you could put more energy in the system, and maybe Mike has something on this. I asked Krieger and he didn't know. But if you can get high flux and throw more energy in the system, and let's say it's in the form of carbs, theoretically you're always going to be topped up and you should have better workouts, because they were seeing it in the weight vest stuff when they were trying to lose weight for comp. They could keep their workouts up, and I was like, maybe you could work out harder as you go up in weight. So, but that's having more energy through the system, pulling it through. It's never a bad thing, especially if you want to lift the most as possible or have the most volume or whatever the hell your weightlifting goal is.
Yeah, and I just think of it from use of carbs and use of fat, right? So if you're doing lower intensity stuff, you're training your body ideally to use more fat as a fuel, because that's going to be a better fuel for that. And then you have more room dietarily to take in more carbohydrates. You're probably not so wired to be burning carbs all the time, so you're actually saving more glycogen for like true higher intensity work. So it makes sense that your performance in the gym should be better. So for people I have like doing body comp, I always watch their gym performance. So we're not stuffing them in a friggin' MRI every week to try to get accurate body comp. Maybe picture circumference, that kind of stuff. But it's not hardcore numbers per se. But I get worried if their AM scale weight is dropping pretty fast and their performance in the gym is just tanking. It's like, maybe we're a little too aggressive and their HRV is just coming super stressful. So you're kind of looking at these little indicators to see where they're at. If body weight is just kind of slowly going down, HRV is looking pretty good, performance is good, you're probably right on track, right? You're probably not going to be losing a ton of muscle, and we're probably not at such a severe caloric deficit that it's impairing your performance. But we're seeing, I know it's weight, not body comp, but we're seeing weight trend down. I think you're in a good spot with that.
Yeah, you know what?
It's cool to hear, even hear that stuff, but it doesn't. I'm dealing with a weight loss community, but this stuff, this G Flux or whatever, it's used very little or tested very little in our population, which is where I want to see kind of what happens with that. And so it only happens if you kind of test the waters with that stuff, and that's where I like James Krieger's weight vest stuff, because he's dealing in flux and body comp, and it's just kind of, it's really fascinating. But he doesn't even have the answers because they're not really studying it. They have one study in humans and it worked, but that's about all they got to.
The underlying concept, I think, is that there's an unavoidable reciprocal nature of exercise, phys, and nutrition, right? Which is, and so many times in the fitness industry, you have people who study one or the other, And you really, I mean, they're two sides of the same coin. You know, what is a carbohydrate? Is it an apple or is it muscle glycogen that's about to be burned? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And that's one of the things I like about the Flux model very much is it does emphasize that it's both. You know, it's really hard if a dietitian might have one course potentially, you know, in sports nutrition or something like that. Is that enough for them to handle the output side of the Flux equation? Maybe not, you know. And by the flip side of that is if you get someone who's a strength coach and has really not had much nutrition, then, you know, how are they going to address the input side of the Flux equation? But there's no doubt. I mean, to completely understand this, and Mike, this is why Mike and I are the way we are, I think, probably, but you have to look at it from both sides. You have to read the literature from both sides because they're inextricably linked, right? You cannot separate. At least when you talk about recomposing the body or weight gain or weight loss or whatever. So,
yeah, I remember John wrote an article once for TMEG years ago, more on exercise stuff, and you know his PhD, John Berardi, was actually in exercise phys. Research was definitely more on the nutritional side. Yeah, the article wasn't like super popular. Everyone's like, he's a nutrition guy. What's he doing talking about exercise? I'm like, he has a PhD technically in exercise physiology, I believe.
Yeah.
Like you said, Lonnie, even when you're trying to do both sides of the equation, that doesn't fit into the society's kind of expectation of what to do, right? And even like the questions you're saying, Dean, with people, and you were saying, Lonnie, too, with what they're looking for and what they expect. They come in thinking that, oh, it's just exercise, it's going to fix all my ills. Or, oh, it's just nutrition. I don't want to do any of that movement stuff. You know, it's, yeah.
Well, and that's the problem as a coach, because, like I said, especially because we're a nutrition company, right? Like,
yeah.
And so, like, I like to use the dark side of, what do you call it, influence, but I'll basically start with the end in mind. I'll just like throw them my article and give them my presentation, just so they're like, oh, they start to understand like maybe this is an end goal, because I don't mind telling people that they probably should exercise and move more along with this diet stuff, even if they're coming to me just for the diet stuff, because at the end of the day, I know they're not going to be able to do it long term. Like, there's very few people that can just attack it on the diet side and not work an office job. They can do it, but they have to eat pretty low calories, and it's just not really feasible in our environment. It'd be different if you lived in the wild, like you looked at the Hadza stuff. Like, they're fucking hunter gatherers. Okay, like they don't have the opportunity to eat McDonald's 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I have no problem selling that story, even if it's not the best answer right now, but no one else is really giving a better answer, because they're going to Google and they're saying, how do I not exercise and lose weight? And then someone will tell them, this is the diet for you. And like, it's not going to work. Like it might, but it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, I think the general relationship is sort of reciprocal. It's dietary changes are great in magnitude but short in duration, right? Like, they don't last.
Yes.
People regain.
No.
Exercise changes are mild but very long-lived. Like, when I was in San Diego, we had an adult walking program, and over literally like a decade, somebody might lose a couple of pounds. Remember, they're not changing their diet at all. And it's just walking, you know, with a couple like light calisthenic type things. But it stuck. They lost, you know, a number of pounds and just kept it off. So I think that's why
you didn't gain either.
Yeah. And you put them together, right? So that way you get the magnitude, the potency that wouldn't be long-lived on the diet side, but then you get the longevity of change, you know, from the exercise. And, of course, study exercise phys, and you can see all these adaptations. You exercise not because it's a calorie drain alone. You do it for all the adaptations you get, mitochondrial density, et cetera, et cetera. So,
well, and that ends up being the problem, is that, like, you have to, and we talked about hiking, or you have to find a thing that they're going to do, because like that's what I hate about
that's
this project, is like, like I was honestly trying to answer the question of, can I use exercise to up their calories, essentially, and like they were all pretty much inconclusive, but they kind of all said working out's good for you, and all I came to that was like, I guess it doesn't matter, they just need to do something. Like, I don't care what it is, and that's hard. Because essentially, I don't think there's that many people that don't like something and they're just too busy to try something else. So it's just a matter of finding that thing. And our community, it's super easy. So that's like plus.
Well, there's the muscle mass thing too. Here's me talking about mitochondria, but I mean, I my old Taekwondo teacher for many years, he used to say, "You guys, it's like the lazy man's way to being lean. You know, all you do is lift heavy weights and eat like pigs. You eat whatever you want." And I'm like, "But that's not lazy." You know, we're lifting a lot of weight. But he's right in that. I mean, he was an exercise physiologist himself. Yeah, all that muscle mass probably helpful. You know, so.
Yeah, and that's why even in the Flex Diet Cert and with clients, I really push them towards recreation, which I think we've kind of forgotten about in modern society. Because I get questions of like, you know, I'm lifting 4 days a week and I'm afraid just to, you know, to go play tennis for an hour. I'm like, mechanically, you think you're going to blow something up or what? They're like, I don't know, is that just too much work? I'm like, no, like just go play, like have fun.
Right.
Well, what do I track? Like how many calories do I need before? No, it's recreation. Do something you love. Just, yes, you'll expend calories, but to me, that's not necessarily the point. That's a cool side effect. You know, if you take up tennis or walking or kiteboarding, whatever, a side effect of doing the thing that you like is you're going to burn more calories and have a higher flux. So it's kind of a win-win, but it's odd that I need to give people like permission to go do these things.
But that's the problem with information. We had this talk with Jordan Shallow about, like, I was talking about being stupid in lifting, but we talked about athletes and what do athletes do or farmers do. And it's like, that's what the gym bro meatheads, they learn how to do it without all this information. And the same thing on the diet end is like it's almost like the Amish people, they weren't thinking about it. They were just eating and doing more. And it's almost like we're using this high-end information to then be the reason why we don't do the thing that's going to work anyways, which is just like literally either working out or just like eating better or doing both. And there's a lot of people in the world that don't think about either, and they figured it out. Why does it have to be so complicated?
Right. So if you had to leave us with your top 2 to 3 tips related to flux, what would those be?
The big thing, like I talked about exercise, but if you're dealing with a client, whether it's weightlifting or whatever, find the thing that they're going to do and they're going to do consistently to then push it if that's where you want to go. And then on top of that, the negatives of flux, especially when you're dealing with weight loss clients, is they have to realize that it is that two-pronged approach. Like if something doesn't go right on one thing, or your environment changes, or you're not lifting, it's also not dangerous, but it's also counterproductive to be in high flux, so to speak. But then your energy levels drop, and you're eating all these calories, and then you're at the same spot you were before. So it's just know that there's downsides to it, know that it works, but you have to basically be a coach.
Yeah, especially since I think most of us listening are doing this for the long term, right? We're not just about all the short term gains with the Z. It's they're talking to people who want to be better over the course of their lifetime, or people who are already bought in to being a lifer. Awesome. Where can people find more information about you if they wanted to hunt you down and listen to your podcast?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy. Instagram's the place where I live a lot of times, so I got the old powerlifting handle, but it's Guedo, Guedo .power. I was obviously a powerlifter, so I had to put that. I just didn't change it. And then so I used to have a podcast. So we actually had our last episode, episode 150 with Alex Viada. But we had our last episode for the Fitness Devil, and that'll be transferring to my co-host. And I don't know what he's calling it. He's calling it like Eat Free, Lift Hard or something. And now I'm doing my side project, which is now my main project. It's called The Pump. And basically we talk about a lot of stuff we talked about here. It's a lot of lifting culture, but with lifters and with coaches, but trying to be less about the fitness industry as a whole and more about things that we actually do, which is lifting, and trying to get into the weeds about either research or lifting, or just kind of being stupid and kind of telling stupid meathead lifting stories, which I always find fascinating, because I tend to learn the most when I find all the dumb stuff, and I keep going back to that, but all the stuff that people did when there wasn't Instagram and there wasn't YouTube. Those seem to be my favorite stories about lifting culture, in my opinion. So that's where you can find all the other stuff I do. And that's a YouTube page, and found anywhere they have podcasts. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again for being on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry. And they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, you know is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.